The Final Fantasy IP is that one IP that most Western gamers probably wouldn't even touch because they're kind of overwhelmed by the amount of games this franchise has. And while that is Square's fault because they're just bad at making business decisions, I for one wanted to try out this franchise for myself to see exactly what the hype is. So yes, I did clickbait you with the title a little bit. These aren't exactly reviews, these are very much first impressions from someone who's ever played these games before in hopes to create conversation in the comment section, or if you're someone who's never played these Final Fantasy games before, you're willing to give them a try now. This franchise does have MMOs as well. They won't be reviewed because there's just so much to unpack in those games. They could be for another video, and Final Fantasy VIII is not one that I touched too much because the systems just completely confused the hell out of me. The first set of games are the pixel remasters, and I just don't look that great next to pixel art, so I'm just gonna turn myself into a pixel.
Now I struggle with old games, so I'm going to keep these pixel remaster reviews fairly shallow. I was very much going through the motions when it came to these games, and I am for sure really bad at them because as soon as I started the playthrough, things were already going wrong. I had gotten hard stuck about 3 times, which means I had to keep restarting the game. Why does it happen? Well, I was playing the Steam version, and at the time, for whatever reason, you cannot turn off encounters, and I had no save file to go back to, so I was completely wrecked. But for some reason, the version on the Nintendo Switch had the ability to turn off the encounters, so I had to get my wallet back out and get the Nintendo Switch version. But I do have to question, if you were around when these games came out, first of all, what are you doing on YouTube? Go look after your family. But also, how the hell did you do it back then? Because it was so easy to get lost, it was so easy to get hard stuck, these games made me feel like an absolute dumbass most of the time, and I had to keep a guide next to me to follow the story. I had to do this for the first 3 Final Fantasies. All of these pixel remaster games play very similarly. All of these have simple, shallow stories to get you going, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, you all know I love a simple motivator. And to be honest, after a while, I was only really playing for the story. The gameplay is very much basic form of turn-based gameplay, which we all know is a signature style for Final Fantasy series until the last few. But let's break down the first 3 games. Final Fantasy I story. 4 warriors get chosen to save the world. Everything is just super simple, and there isn't much memorable moments for me. And to be honest, I can barely even remember it even now. Not a bad game, it's just not one I'd recommend. You don't ever want to play this because you're curious to see the game that started it all. And Final Fantasy III, I didn't really like this one because of the tone and story, and it did nothing for me whatsoever. I feel like they made this one to get a bigger audience because it does seem like to have the most childish kid hero tone, which doesn't make any sense because for some reason, Final Fantasy III feels like the hardest one even with the cheats menu, and navigating the world just feels so disjointed. So already we're off to a bad start, and I really should have just stopped my Final Fantasy journey there. But these games are from the early 90s, so what can you really expect, you know? And you probably noticed I skipped Final Fantasy II, and that's because Final Fantasy II, which is apparently the most hated one, was actually really good. The gameplay for Final Fantasy II felt perfectly fine to me, and that's probably because I was on a pixel remaster which fixes the problems of the original Final Fantasy II. The NES version, the original version, apparently there's a lot of time wasting with empty dungeons, and sometimes the game would strongly penalize you for leveling up, which I think most of these early games do. It's a balancing thing, I don't know, I'm not nerdy enough to fully understand how it works, but these weren't issues for me when I was playing on the pixel remasters. Final Fantasy II just felt great. The tone, the characters, the uniqueness, the rotating companion, this gave me exactly what I was looking for. There was a lot of moments that genuinely had me shocked. People straight up die in this game, like straight bodied. Towns getting blown up to hell, and it all adds to the sense of urgency. Again, the gameplay wasn't anything crazy, but the world's traversal was very easy to understand, and the story was just engaging all the way through. I was also amazed how better detailed the world was, how different areas were from each other, and how nicely it set the atmosphere. I was just starting to see why people may have actually loved this iconic series. By the end, I remember the characters, and it's been a while since I beat the game. It's a shame people didn't really enjoy this game given the issues back then, but I do implore you to try this one again if you're a long-time Final Fantasy fan and haven't tried the pixel version. And to newbies, I highly recommend Final Fantasy II. Love it, go play it. It has the most character, it has the most charm. Play this one, 7 out of 10. This one is a good game. So that's the first 3 Final Fantasies out the way. I haven't gone into great detail about these games because there's one in particular that I really want to spend a lot of time on that's within the Pixel Remaster collection. But for now, let's get to Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy V. At this point, we're in 1991, and by the looks of it, it seems like Squaresoft were going off in a different direction for their games. It doesn't seem like gaming was in a deep state of storytelling and depthful characters just yet, but it seems like Square were pushing harder to go in this direction. Final Fantasy IV and V almost feels like your Sony exclusive just in 1991 form. This is where they had the biggest emphasis on characters and almost to the point where it almost comes at the game's detriment. They played differently from each other, and V offers some new systems so that may be worth trying for some. While I enjoyed the new approach and storytelling within the game, I feel like the gameplay took too much of a back seat in these two. It's an engaging story and it can be well in tune, but truly, that's all there really is. And really the characters and stories isn't really mind-blowing. I'm sure that they both have cult fan bases who love these games, but I didn't really connect with either of these. I just felt super neutral about them. But I did really like the new approach. I did like they were trying new things 5 games into the series. The world was getting more and more detailed as the series progressed, and I was getting to the point where I couldn't wait to traverse the world to see what ways Squares had changed up their atmosphere. These are the type of games you play if someone close to you recommends it, but for me, I was slightly losing interest in these games as they went on. Fire's story puts you in some fun and goofy situations that helps with the funness, but that's about it. It was just cool. I was still very much interested in playing more Final Fantasies. It was just showing a lot of potential. I mean, these games were made in the early 90s. I just need one to have a perfect blend of what Final Fantasy II was doing in terms of story and tone, and maybe some gameplay that felt a bit more rewarding even if you're on hour 20. The job system in Final Fantasy V wasn't a bad idea at all. While I was excited to play more, I was fearing that I'd get hit with the fatigue of Final Fantasy. So when it came to Final Fantasy VI, yeah, I had nothing to worry about because this game is fucking amazing. I absolutely love it. Final Fantasy VI by far is the best Final Fantasy within the Pixel remasters. This game truly is peak content. 6 is the newest out of all the Pixel remasters, but yet its story and atmosphere feels the most retro. It has a good sense of familiarity and it feels very reminiscent of a lot of pop culture movies that we all know and love today. They have a huge emphasis on story and just character work, and I actually think the story is probably the most interesting one next to Final Fantasy VII. Honestly. The premise goes as follows. Magic used to exist in this world, but because of human greediness, it got destroyed. Now, doesn't that just sound realistic? Magic wasn't just something that people used as an offensive weapon like other Final Fantasies before it, it's very much a story element now. It was a resource to power the world, so now that it's gone, it's left the world in some sort of disarray. The world feels miserable and just has a steep type of vibe to it. All of these things lead the game to have great atmosphere. What's a game without atmosphere, right? But one of the beauties about this game, and something that I absolutely love, is that there is no main character. There are characters that are more important than others in terms of beginning, middle, and end, but after a while, it gets very hard to tell which of these characters are supposed to be important because they all feel like they are. Terra is the first character you play as, and the story revolves around her for the most part, but even the story finds a way to backseat her ass later on. Now, I don't want to do the cliche video essay thing and retell the story to you, but the storytelling here is engaging all the way through, and that's mostly because of its character work. Terra meets a character called Lot, which then leads her to another character called Edgar. Kefka the villain comes through and has a menacing laugh. Then we meet another character called Shadow who ignores us because he just doesn't give a shit. Then we meet Sabin, who's Edgar's brother, who's beating up some other dude for some reason. Then we meet Bannon, some old wise man. Then we meet a samurai character, and then we meet another old man, and he has a granddaughter. And listen, it's a lot. It's all great. I love it. All these characters all have their fair share of time within the story. They will have their moments where the story will take them to the side and just let them speak, have emotional moments where you see them laugh, cry, fight, and even sing. I'm serious.
That's a lovely, lovely voice.
Final Fantasy VI doesn't even seem like it belongs in the set of these games. This game truly did blow my expectations out of the water. I mean, even the way the game starts, it definitely has a different feeling. There's a lot more world building, better storytelling, engaging path choices, better presentation, better villains. The summons are actual characters, something we don't see again till 14, I guess? I don't really know. Gameplay wise, the game doesn't feel that much different from the others. The abilities are a lot more cool and have nicer animations, and I do like the fact that the abilities are very much tied to the character's personality, which helps represent who they are. One thing you can look forward to if you haven't played is the ability to make choices. Now, I'll be honest, these choices don't really affect anything, but I'll be honest, it's still pretty interactive nonetheless. I'm pretty sure my choices got Sid killed, but wait, there's a Sid in... Have all these games got a Sid in them? What the fuck? In past Final Fantasy games, the group is always together, and at most, one of the party members would swap out like in Final Fantasy II. Here you can make different formations, and if you pick the right character for the right moments, you might get some additional scenes. Now this might really does tickle my pickle. It's still 1994, technology's still limited, so don't expect a huge branching path type of game here. It's certainly not that. But those moments really help the game to be more engaging. I'm slightly downplaying it because I kind of don't want to gas it up too much, but characters can die throughout your journey. You can lose characters. I lost one and I have no idea how. And you can get multiple endings given your choices you make within the game and what characters you have with you. So yeah, I really want to tell you guys more about this game, but I'd be spoiling it, so guys, please play this game. Yes, the gameplay is regular Final Fantasy, but the story and characters are the best I've ever seen in a game, best I've seen in a JRPG. It's truly an amazing experience. So that's all the Pixel remasters reviewed. While I didn't love them all, I can understand why these games mean a lot to a lot of people. Square seem to be the innovators of having strong narratives within their games. It's the 1990s and I still fell in love with some of their storytelling here. It's just that for some, I was very much going through the motions and I was just very much ready to hit the 3D era. I'll speak more about the job systems and the music later on because I know some of you are wondering about that, and how could you not? It's Final Fantasy. But for now, I'm gonna change back and we can talk about one of the most iconic games of all time, Final Fantasy VII.
Final Fantasy VII deserves all the hype. Like, I'm not kidding. This game is an absolute masterpiece. 7 goes more into the linear design, but it still has the elements of freedom that we see in the earlier games. While I don't think it's better than 6, I think the storytelling has a lot more love and care when it comes to the character work. Every character in Final Fantasy VII feels solid, and I think it hits those group dynamic moments really well. I'm video spoiling a little bit, but this Final Fantasy is doing things that the modern Final Fantasies can't even do, and that's give the player a sense of freedom and a sense of decision making. There are side missions in this game, but you probably wouldn't even know because they're not in your face. A lot of the side missions are presented as NPC waffle. Game dialogue is for short age, and reading it out loud will make you realize that, and I have a voice acting mod, which the mods in this game are tremendous, by the way. Don't play the PC version without mods, it's kind of silly. Again, gameplay is not the reason why you will be playing Final Fantasy VII. I enjoy the addition of the limit breaks. It makes the combat a bit more engaging. And Final Fantasy VII feels like one of the more difficult Final Fantasies compared to the first 6. I spent forever trying to jump to this wire if I still have the footage. I lost a bunch of footage into making this video. I won't even get into it. 7 doesn't really innovate on the way you travel the world, but it does innovate on the way the game looks. This is the first 3D one within the franchise, and that alone makes this one of the most iconic games of all time, the most iconic RPG of all time. Now, I can't speak too much on this game as much as I want to. 1, because I lost all my footage, and 2, the remakes are still in the progress of coming out. Part 3 isn't out yet. We're still waiting for Final Fantasy Homecoming, Final Fantasy Reunion, Final Fantasy Return of the Jedi, I don't know. But this is where my annoyance with Square Enix does begin. For context, FF Remake I played in the beginning of the pandemic, and I had an amazing time with it. But I was a little disappointed to find out that they were splitting the one OG game into 3 different parts. But I thought, fine. Maybe they want to do something different. Maybe they want to make sure they wasn't giving you a one-to-one experience. Then I heard for me to understand part 2, I would need to play a game called Final Fantasy Crisis Core. Okay, I don't know what that is, but I said I'll play that too. And as someone who's beaten Rebirth, the part 2 to Final Fantasy VII remakes, you do need Crisis Core. And everyone who says differently probably watches My Hero Academia. There is just so much lore and context within that game that really helps you understand the world of the Final Fantasy VII remakes way more, and there's a character in there that really appears at the end of Rebirth, which if you don't know who it is, you're not really gonna understand it. I think Square really fumbled with the decision making here. I don't want to spoil, but the whole Rebirth ending really feels satisfying if you've played Crisis Core. If you haven't played it, you're gonna look at the ending and think, what the hell is happening? Which makes me look at Final Fantasy Rebirth in a weird way, because the game is filled with so much fluff. I kind of wish they kind of just took Crisis Core, took Rebirth and just put it into one and just made a bit more of a concrete, solid, straightforward story, which we'll get to Rebirth in a moment, because even though I've already started negatively, that game is amazing. Outside of Crisis Core, there are other games that you might need to play, called games like EverQuest and Advent Children, and again, as I said, Square's business practices gets really fucking silly. I'm pretty sure one of them is a mobile game, and I'm not playing a mobile game. You've lost your mind. So my main point is, Square really makes some odd decisions which might put people off these Final Fantasy VII games, which is a shame because I can't recommend these enough. So if you can't be bothered to play this game and that game and this game and that game and that game to understand this game, then I completely understand, and you could just stick with the original Final Fantasy VII. I just ask that you mod it because on the PC port it absolutely sucks. There's tutorials out there to help you with these things. Use the 7th Heaven mod, it makes things much easier. But I highly recommend it. It's a stunning piece of art with beautiful character work, with strong narratives and amazing story writing. Final Fantasy 6 and 7, Square was just in their bag. Like, these boys cooked, like Jesus. What about those remakes though? They are amazing. As I said, I absolutely love them. Remake is like the first 3 to 4 hours of original 7. So yes, they do add some filler to make it a 40-hour game, which is nearly the length of the original game. Game is beautiful and it's almost mind-blowing that it's on a PS4 at times. One thing that these remakes do amazingly is the combat system. And again, in Rebirth, I can't say too much, but I've put 120 hours in and I still plan to play more. But to keep it short, Rebirth is an amazing game. It's very close to Remake. It's a lot of filler, it's bloated. If you try and do it 100%, you're gonna lose your mind, and I don't really recommend that. But I've been doing it because I do like the game, but I understand not everyone's gonna be me. So make sure you play it on a casual playthrough. Don't try and do everything. Just enjoy the game, do it with smooth sailing, and I promise you, you'll have an amazing time. I don't really like Final Fantasy VIII, and we are running out of time when it comes to this video because I'm trying to keep it under an hour. So forget Final Fantasy VIII. I'm not trying to be too negative anyway. So for now, we can skip to Final Fantasy IX is the 9th installment to the Final Fantasy franchise, more like the 9th mainline installment because Square Enix, they lose their mind sometimes. This has been a game I've been so excited to play because I know it is loved by so many people within the Final Fantasy fandom. Especially with my horrible experience with Final Fantasy VIII, I just couldn't wait to get to it just to see what the hype was all about. And unlike every other Final Fantasy that I've played before, this Final Fantasy I know the most about. I'm aware that without this Final Fantasy specifically, we wouldn't have gotten Kingdom Hearts 1. This probably is the second most influential Final Fantasy when it comes to Square Enix's history. And as soon as you start the game, you can pretty much see it. Because of this art style, the game has just aged tremendously. You don't need me to break down why art style is way more important than graphics. There's a million videos on YouTube explaining that already. I should let you know beforehand that there are mods installed in this version that I am playing, which is the Meguri mod, mostly used to upscale the quality of the game's graphics at times. Enough has been done when it comes to the game's difficulty. I still found the game extremely hard sometimes because I'm just bad at JRPGs, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Final Fantasy IX truly has been an amazing experience for me, so much so that I'm gonna call it the second best Final Fantasy so far, right after Final Fantasy VI. From story, character, world exploration, I like the way how linear it is but still has that sense of freedom. This game truly does seem to understand what makes a Final Fantasy game, and it has a Cid. Some would say that Final Fantasy VII is a lot better than Final Fantasy IX, and I just have to slightly disagree. I believe that Final Fantasy IX does a lot more things better than it does in Final Fantasy VII, especially when it comes to that charm, the character, and its personality. As soon as the game starts, it's showing you how much emphasis there is on character when it comes to this game. It's safe to say that this is where the franchise starts to have a bit more emphasis when it comes to its intros. This intro is like really, really good. It's not Final Fantasy X's levels of hype in terms of intro. I just prefer this one here because it's very much the characters making their own decisions. It's very much rooted in their own choices here. And it goes as simple as this. These guys are crooks, just straight, goofy, silly crooks who want to kidnap their princess for ransom. They're just looking for a bag. It's calculated, somewhat serious, but it's still done with that goofy tune to make things still feel a bit fun. Because as soon as they're ready to infiltrate and kidnap the princess, she kind of appears in front of them and says, hey, I kind of want to be kidnapped because life kind of sucks as a princess. She's asking to be kidnapped because she wants freedom. She wants to have her own life and have her own adventure. This isn't a trope that we're unfamiliar to, but given how charming and how much personality there is within the story already, I'm fully open to it still. At the same time, her royal bodyguard is doing the utmost to protect her and reluctantly ends up joining us on the adventure just to keep her safe, and he is not happy about it. He's damn near miserable for the first half of the game. But just that simple task of kidnapping the princess goes completely awry. I say simple. It should have went according to plan, and it went completely wrong, damn near blowing up the city. One of the crew members ends up being petrified, which kind of sets them to get some new motivations to keep our story going. It's not necessarily a life and death situation. It's just people just trying to get a bag, and I really like that. I don't want to recite the story, but already Princess Garnet, Zidane, and Steiner are already characters you're probably going to remember just off his intro. And there's also another character who comes along with this adventure accidentally, and that character is, of course, Vivi. I don't even have to look it up. I can just already tell that Vivi is probably a fan favorite when it comes to this game in terms of its characters. From design, likability, his cuteness, and his storytelling, it screams everything that the average player would fall in love with in terms of a character. Like with every Final Fantasy, you will meet more characters throughout your journey, but none of them are optional. They're all kind of forced upon you, even when it does feel like they should be optional, like Quena I thought was optional, but no, apparently everyone gets Quena. And that's why I would say Final Fantasy VII gets that freedom within its linearity down perfectly. I think it's the best at what it does in that aspect there. Gameplay wise though, Final Fantasy is very much your turn-based game. There's nothing really different here that I can tell anyway. It seems to be a decent leveling system. There's also a system here that kind of optimizes your tools for you. You can just click it and it just puts everything on your characters instantly with the best stuff. That was absolutely beautiful. For some reason, it's not in the latest games, as I mentioned earlier. Now, I am for sure getting better at these games, but these games are also feeling easier as they proceed. I'm assuming Square's trying to prioritize a casual gaming experience, especially when a game that looks like this. In saying that though, in the last 75% of the game, it was hard as shit. Like, it was difficult. Which is crazy too, because the hardest part of the game was probably trying to get out of this damn cage. I was stuck here for a good 15 minutes. I just couldn't figure it out. It was irritating me. I'm guessing the end is supposed to be grindy and hard, but man, it just isn't fun. But I was determined to beat it since I had made it so far, which does lead me to my critiques of the game. The game really starts off strong, but as it goes on, the writing starts to crack in certain places. For its story and for some of the character work especially. For the most part, the story stayed within a grounded feeling. very much political based. Garnet's mother is waging war on other countries and we're trying to stop her. And once we get to resolving that issue, the story seems to go a little bit crazy, which isn't really unfamiliar for the Final Fantasy franchise, but I really just don't like it here. These guys being in grounded situations really brings out the best writing for the characters. They all have their traits, their positives, their self-doubts, and are all nicely pulled together in the forefront, and the story is keeping itself loosely simple. I did find that Garnet goes from this fun and adventurous young lady who grows and matures, but in return, kind of becomes really boring and just miserable. I kind of ended up disliking her towards the end, which is really disappointing, but when you match her to the other characters around the game, they all feel fun and goofy, and she kind of just kills the energy for me. It's also because of Garnet's story arc that I'd say the story gets a little bit more convoluted than I'd like it to be. I was enjoying the story until it starts getting more into Zidane's past and him being special and designed by Garland for people of terror. I don't care, it just felt tacked on. I just didn't give a f. And the ending bosses just felt like they were trying to make something grand and spectacular and flashy and just something to tickle your pickle. I gotta stop saying that. But due to them being ambitious in this way, I just felt like they lost focus on what was making a perfect story with perfect characters. Like the villains in this game were just so forgettable, which is really a shame because Beatrix and Kuja are really nicely designed. I also never used Amarant much. He was just a character I just didn't really care for. By the time the game introduced me to him, I was already happy with the characters that the game already was giving me. Did I say I preferred this game over Final Fantasy VII? Now that I think about it and I'm writing the script and just think about all the critiques I have for the game, I'm kind of not so sure and I might take it back a little bit. There is just so much beauty here in Final Fantasy IX, and perhaps it is just the art style doing a sab on me, but I do think that's where the game shines. I truly do think this is an amazing game. It just kind of goes a bit goofy towards the end. Either way, this game has been an enjoyable experience, an amazing experience, and I'm sticking to that. Final Fantasy IX, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Amazing game. After giving it a little bit more thought, I do think Final Fantasy VII is slightly better than Final Fantasy IX, just by a little bit though, just by a little bit. But for now, we can go on to our next game in the franchise, probably the most popular game within the franchise. I'm looking forward to this one. It's Final Fantasy X. Finally, we made it to what is probably the most popular Final Fantasy to people who were too young to give it a Final Fantasy VII hype, or you're one of those gamers that don't enjoy reading in their video games and you never cared to go back. Either way, Final Fantasy X is a true representation as to why I adore the Final Fantasy as a franchise, even if I don't love every single game. Every entry they're trying to do something new, every new title they're trying to innovate and make sure that they're creating something new to the gaming trend, or doing that trend better than everyone else is. This may not mean much to you, but it means a lot to me. There was nothing stopping Square from just going down the Pokemon route and not innovating on their formula. But instead, by 2002, for the very first time, they decided to add voice acting for their game. I have to applaud Square for their presentational work on this game. This game looks tremendous, and even now it's aged decently due to its art style. From the music, the English and Japanese voice acting, character designs, and the beautiful, colorful cutscenes, this game looks absolutely tremendous for a game from 2001, and I see why people absolutely love this game. Too bad I think it's a huge step back and I don't actually love it that much. I can recognize that Final Fantasy X is a technical masterpiece for the time, but this is where I'd say the rookiness of the Final Fantasy franchise starts to begin. It seemed like Square Enix has reached a crossroad where ideas and budgets start to collide. They can make JRPGs with exploration being the core focus, giving the player a nice sense of freedom, find and completely miss out on things, and let them experiment with character builds, which also helps with the replay value a lot more. Or they could go with option B, create an engaging narrative first, character builds set in their own vision, and try to keep some of the RPG elements, even if extremely basic, for mass appeal or an easier barrier to entry. To put it simply, they'd reached that crossroads where they had to choose between the Final Fantasy V game design and the Final Fantasy VI game design. And I haven't looked this up, but I'm just going to assume that every game that had the approach of keeping things simple and basic probably sold much better. If you pay attention to the gaming industry, this isn't anything new. I'm not saying anything profound here. But I do find it interesting because they did add a job system in Final Fantasy XII, and if I had to guess, They never added a job system again after that. But when it comes to Final Fantasy X, they continue to lean more in a linear style that was clearly a narrative-focused game. They clearly spent more time allocating the budgets and resources to create something that looked and sounded astonishing. To go from 9 to this is crazy, but the biggest issue for me is that the game is just missing a whole bunch of charm that was in a bunch of previous games. Final Fantasy X's worst crime is its own innovation and its illusion of experimentation. We'll get into that in a moment because I know I just sounded smart. But first, let's talk about the actual game itself. First of all, the intro is sexy as f. Like, what's a better way of starting the game than just getting everyone obliterated? From the beginning, it lets the player know that we are playing with forces that are just above us. That means they learn from Final Fantasy IX. In this game, we are playing as Tidus, or Tidus, I'm not exactly sure how to say it, but he gets transported from his present time to a completely different timeline because of story elements. I won't get into it because of spoilers. The story itself is cool, it's serviceable, it will get you from A to B, it's decently paced, has some nice dialogue for a Final Fantasy game, and I like the way it does its expositioning. And that's because the main character, Tidus, doesn't really know anything about the world that he's in either, so we learn when he learns. It's a very anime way of doing expositioning, but as an anime fan, I didn't mind it. The story itself didn't really have me on the edge of my seat, and it certainly wasn't the reason why I was playing. Once again, Final Fantasy knocks it out of the park because of its characters and their particular story arcs. I can't speak. The same type of writing styles in Final Fantasy IX, but it's a lot more simple and subtle over there. In Final Fantasy X, they take a bit more further. All of these characters are very mysterious and keep themselves away from Tidus, but as the story goes on, you learn more about their issues, their relationship that they have with each other, and what keeps them going. It's so well implemented into the story, and it's not locked away behind tedious side quests. Sometimes it just takes you spamming the A button to find out more of a conversation. I really like that aspect there. The more the story goes on, the more you realize that Tidus himself isn't really the main character of the story. The story doesn't particularly revolve around him till the ending, really. The truth of the matter is, the main character really is Yuna. Now, I hate to piss on your drink, Final Fantasy fans, but I don't really like Yuna much. She might be the weakest character in our main set of characters. Yuna as a character is well written, nicely designed, and has one of the best cutscenes in the game, probably in the whole franchise. I fully understand why people love her, and I only know that people love her because I see her cosplay all the time. She very much has the world on her shoulders, but too perfect for this world type of character type, and she does grow as the game goes on, but it's very much the same issues that I have with Garnet in Final Fantasy IX. When she's just on screen, she doesn't really evoke much excitement or energy. The only time I really care for her is when she makes the other characters look good, such as Tidus or Lulu. And I get it, before you say it, yes. It makes sense to the world that she lives in, she has a lot on her shoulders, and she's a product of the extremely terrible situation. As I said, not badly written, I just find it extremely boring. Everyone else though is pretty good. I love how nicely designed these characters are. I'm not entirely sure what the inspiration is for these clothes. It's a bit of like a tech wear, traditional, I'm not entirely sure. And Lulu's wearing this dress with a bunch of belts. I'm not sure what inspired that. I can only imagine, and if I say, I might get demonetized. But she is a very well-designed character. I did enjoy looking at her design very, very much so. Very much so. And Kamara is a different race, which is very cool, and they don't just do it for a look, they do delve into his story arcs and it has stuff to do with his own culture and his race of people, and it's very nicely implemented. Orion is just a guy in a nightgown with a sword, with an eye patch, and I imagine he looks cool to a lot of people, and I can't lie, it is pretty cool. Iron as a character feels like he's just there as a device to help with exposition, but he does bring balance to the group sometimes when situations do get hot. And he probably has the best plot twists throughout the game, which I won't really get into because of spoilers. There is one character that I hated throughout the whole game, and it's not because how they were written, it's just because how they sounded.
First things first, let's go over the basics again, boys.
Whoever voiced him, I kind of just want to destroy you with my mind. Walker as a character is really cool and he's one of my favorite characters for in the story. It's just that he's a huge race. And it makes sense to the story and the world's lore and everything he's been taught, but it is kind of crazy. But don't get me wrong, I do like me some video game. This might be another hot take, but I do think I found the best villain throughout the Final Fantasy franchise, and that is Sin. I absolutely love the presence of Sin, and they make it clear that Sin is something to be feared from the very beginning of the game. This is definitely the type of villain that you can expect to see in a God of War game. The villain doesn't really speak, and you don't even really see him in full form very much. But as I said during the Pixel Remasters, atmosphere is every gaming YouTuber's talking point because it really does help the game so much in so many ways, especially in this instance where the story and the world need a villain like this. What about Seymour? I'm not trying to fight the same person 5 times. Seymour was very cool in the beginning, but by the end of the game, I was just so over him, and I kind of just don't really like him anymore. He's not a Final Fantasy villain that I particularly am going to remember by the time I finish all these games. The gameplay here is very much the same, it's just that there is no ATB system, which I absolutely love. I've been waiting for this. Once I got to 9, I was just so over that system, so I'm glad it's gone. And I like the ability that you can change the character whenever you want to, and I like the fact that certain enemies can only be killed by certain characters. Granted, this did get annoying after a while, but I'm glad it kind of kept my mind engaged. By the way, the menus are still trash. Surprise, surprise. I hated macromanaging and I only ever went in there when I needed to go in there to defeat an enemy. Another disappointing thing about this game is how the world looks. When you're running around it, it looks like absolute caca. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, it looks like shit. And again, they spent so much money and resources into creating that narrative and technically a great game. I just don't see the point why they even added this little open world section here in the first place. I wasn't really trying to run through this. It wasn't very engaging. I kind of just skipped it, grinded a little bit, and kept it pushing. All in all, this game has great presentation, amazing animations, amazing audio, good music, and technically so well put together, but it lacks character that I preferred in previous games. The dialogue is nice, but it's far less interesting than previous games. The characters are cool, but I think the characters are a lot more better in previous games. The world design is complete caca to the point where I don't even think they should even add in an open world. The Final Fantasy franchise is definitely improving and innovating technically, but I do feel like in Final Fantasy X, they took a few steps back. It's not as interesting as it is in previous Final Fantasy entries. There's a moment in the Pixel remasters where a pixel character gets turned to stone, and it's so goofy that I absolutely laughed at it when I saw it. But yet, it stuck with me because it has that charm. There's some sort of allure when it comes to the imperfection of no voice acting, and an old friend once told me that limitations inspire creativity, and I do feel like that is the case with the Final Fantasy franchise, because going forward, that charm seems to get less and less, even if things are innovating from a graphical standpoint. Final Fantasy XII is the worst Final Fantasy in the franchise. Sadly, I don't like this game at all. Originally, I wanted to have this goofy section of me shouting and ranting as to why this game sucks, but I just didn't think that would be productive, and there's enough negativity around the gaming conversation. If I see another video about Ubisoft, I'm gonna lose my mind. But the point of this video is to review these games, so I'm just gonna keep it fairly brief. Final Fantasy XII is a dry and bland video game with extremely weak and unmemorable characters, designs that are by far the weakest in the series, non-engaging gameplay that plays itself, and graphically the worst looking game within the series. How did that even happen? The story, while not bad, is told in an expressionless and an unfun way. Boring monotone dialogues being said by characters that aren't remotely interesting, with their motivations being poorly implemented into the story. A complete 180 on what was making past Final Fantasy stories great. A lot of games design solely feels like it's here just to waste your time, with areas as big as they can possibly be, while characters run extremely slow. That can be said about the menus, easy to navigate through, but you will spend a lot of time in them. Not as much time as you'll be spending traversing the world if you don't have one of those teleportation stones. The few positives I will give Final Fantasy XII is the world's design. It's so intricate and well detailed. I love the effort that the team put in here, from the tall buildings, the brick walls and textures. Every town has this old sense of wealth and brokenness. I hate how long it takes to get from point A to B, but the visual experience is very pleasant. I wish they did more with their NPCs to drive these themes home. One of the better moments in the game is where one of the characters visits their home and we see more of an insight into a culture, the way her species lives and their beliefs. This is very much my favorite part of the game. While the Star Wars inspiration is clearly strong with Final Fantasy XII, it just feels like they took more of a page out of the Attack on the Clone book instead of Empire Strikes Back, and just like how Anakin doesn't like sand, I don't like anything about this game. There's no way you go from intros like Final Fantasy IX and X, but start off with a wall of text for Final Fantasy XII. I just don't, why? But playing this game brought back that feeling of Square truly not understanding how to do experimentation correctly, and their games having that fake sense of freedom. Which is why I came up with the term, the illusion of experimentation, a term that I made up just to sound smart. You will let me know if it's working, but for now, let me explain to you what I really mean by this. Classes in session. The job system in theory is one of the coolest systems within the Final Fantasy franchise, because I believe it is the last line between linearity and freedom, meaning the narrative focused gameplay versus the gameplay USP. USP meaning unique selling points. Try and keep up. The problem with Square Enix is the experimentation aspect feels more punishing than rewarding, and it feels like it's mostly placed there to be time consuming, and because of this, every game with a job system is my least favorite Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy V was the one to do it the best, but it still had the same problems that 3 and 13 did. It really felt like I had to build the right characters to make life easier, and to me, that doesn't really feel like true freedom. If I'm just gonna struggle for having the wrong build, then it doesn't really feel like it's worth playing at that point. I'm also putting a spear in this conversation too. I bet you thought I forgot about this dumbass system, but no. This system was pissing me off throughout the whole of Final Fantasy X. I was enjoying picking whatever move my character could learn, even if it didn't make sense to the character, because that felt like true freedom at first. But there was plenty of times when I was playing Final Fantasy X where I get stuck at a boss and I just could not beat it. And at first you think, maybe it's skill. Maybe I just gotta get good,
Or maybe it's because I'm just super underleveled. Maybe it's because I don't have the right equipment. There can be so many reasons why you can't beat a boss in Final Fantasy X. And you realize it's not because of those things. It's just because you don't have this one move on the spear grid, so now the boss battle feels completely impossible. So now you gotta backtrack, go find somewhere to grind, so you go back on the spear grid and go find the right move that you need to beat the boss. And once you have it, you realize that the boss is completely easy now. Where is the freedom in that? I'm going to explode. Still, when it comes to Final Fantasy XII, I appreciate the fact that they tried the Joe System 1 last time. I appreciate the fact that they tried something new with the combat. And I'll give this game shit for having boring characters, a horrible art style, and non-engaging combat. The only redeeming thing I would say is the music, which, hold on, we haven't spoken about the music yet. Consider this an interlude because I've been wanting to talk about the Final Fantasy music for a while now. For those of you who don't know, I have a huge passion for music, so much so that this channel actually used to be a channel about music. I have a bunch of videos that are unlisted about music and artists, and they just didn't do well, so I stopped making those videos. But I absolutely love music, and I absolutely love video game soundtracks because I believe it's one of the last bits of media that really care about live instrumentation. But if you just look around the room, you'll see all the vinyl posters on here because these are just albums that I particularly care about. Different genres, different sounds, and just sometimes not even English. It was no secret to me that the Final Fantasy franchise's music is seen as iconic because I have a bunch of nerdy friends who absolutely love this franchise. But it's safe to say that I am now part of that fandom when it comes to the music of Final Fantasy. As soon as I started this franchise with the Pixel Remasters, the first thing you notice is the music. And I mean, you would. There's no voice acting in them, so a lot of its presentation is based off the sound of the game. Every dungeon has its own sound and vibe. They use that to tell its story, and it's well. The Pixel Remasters have the orchestrated version set to default on the soundtrack, but you can change them back to the old Pixel ones, and they still sound pretty cool. It should be a surprise to no one why the Final Fantasy soundtrack is seen as so iconic. These guys went 9 games without having any voice acting, so their music wasn't just there for background noise. The music is the game. It's part of the DNA. All the iconic Final Fantasy moments hit home because of the music's implementation. But another reason why the Final Fantasy soundtrack is seen as so iconic is because you can ask any Final Fantasy fan, what is your top 5 songs? And they'll give you a different list from each other. So much so, I asked my nerdy friends what their top 5 songs were, and they all gave me different answers. And if you look at their list, they're all different, songs from different games, and I told them to add a spin-off one in there just to spice it up. Some of these songs I've been using throughout the video because I too think these are amazing as well. The songs by themselves really are amazing, but let me show you my favorite scenes that hit so well because of the music.
Since when have heroes ever needed plans?
I'm gonna go ahead and say it might be a little bit ignorant, but I do think the Final Fantasy franchise has the best music. But here's my top 5 Final Fantasy soundtracks. Number 1 being a game that we haven't actually spoke about yet, it has to be
Final Fantasy XIII has 3 games. 13, 13-2, and 13-3, which is Lightning Returns. They don't call it 13-3 because they tried to be smart with the marketing, but by then, it was already too late. As I said before, Square is not great at making sequels, and 13 is probably the most polarizing set of games within the franchise. That or 15 or 16, yeah, the franchise just needs help. But while my thoughts on Final Fantasy XIII are a little bit more positive than most, this really is the game that broke me. 13 leans more into that Final Fantasy X direction in terms of mission structure and level design, meaning strong narrative and very little player freedom. This game is very, very linear. Which some would say that's not my Final Fantasy, which I can understand, but that's kind of the beauty of the franchise. You might not always get what you're looking for. But I will be real with you. Final Fantasy X might be the last game I recommend from this franchise, because it really has been downhill ever since.
straight up lying if I said I knew what the f this story was about. But here's my little summary. Sarah gets captured by the Ops and gets turned frozen, and Lightning, her sister, goes to save her. While doing that, she meets 4 other folk who end up being turned into the sea, and they end up learning that they can use this cursed power to save the world. That's the most simplistic version I could give you. But this story really is hard to keep up with for dumbasses like me who are nothing but confused about the annoying terms that this game brings up. L'Cie, Fal'Cie, Post-L'Cie, Grand Post, I need to pee, and all sorts of jargon that just flew over my head. Like always, I am here for the characters because I love to see how they tackle their problems within the overarching story. When it comes to 13's characters, I do feel a little conflicted. I like Lightning a lot at first because it does feel like she really takes control of her situation. She is flawed, selfish, yet very headstrong. But sadly, as the story goes on, I do feel like she gets more and more bland, and it's crazy that Lightning gets 3 games, and by the end of it, I still found her to be boring. I'm not gonna break down these characters one by one because we'll be here all day, but Square isn't new to the group of characters within a storyline. But for some reason here, I feel no chemistry between these characters. A lot of their scenes just come across as awkward, and I blame the structure of the writing for that mainly. Before we even learn about who these characters are, they spend the first core of the game just fighting each other, and they pretty much hate each other.
Does she look protected?
Another issue is that we don't actually learn about the characters in real time. In the beginning, we see all their backstories just so the story can set up their need to get over this character redemption arc. The characters do eventually get better, but I do wish the structure for their plot points was a little better. I did really like Feng, but not for any major reason. She has a very cool design, the accent is nice, and she doesn't really have any cringy moments. She should be the weakest character here, but she's kind of the best out of a mediocre bunch, so we'll take it. So the story and characters are a bit of a mess, but what about the gameplay? The gameplay is okay. Probably the most okay gameplay you're gonna find in a Final Fantasy game. There's kind of a new job system here. We'll call it an instant job system. This is where you can change a job on your character within the battle, and I'll be real, I actually do really like this system. I think they call it the Paragrim system. But the battle system really was fun to me. There was plenty of times where I really had to use my head and try and figure out who are the best people to use within the fight and what job should I give them to win the fight. It kept me very engaged. But there are deep flaws within this game system that makes me think that if you're new to the franchise, I wouldn't recommend you start with this one. Because for some reason, while you're in the battle, you can't control the other characters. And the battle is over when the leader dies. Even if you have 100 Phoenix potions, you can't bring him back. You're just cooked. You also can't make a command list like you could in 12, which I really feel like this game needed at times, because there's times where I needed healing and the AI decides to heal somebody else who doesn't need it, and it drove me absolutely insane. A lot of these issues you don't notice nor mind because the game isn't really that difficult. There was a boss that took about 4 hours to beat because my characters wouldn't spread out, they just stuck together and just made it easy to clap all of them. But I was enjoying the challenge. I was in tuned, I was engaged, and I enjoyed the puzzle of just trying to beat a boss and seeing what jobs to use. The experimentation here does feel like OG Final Fantasy a little bit. But then it just starts getting ridiculous once that open world section appears. When you make your game extremely hard and extremely stupidly grindy, all your flaws very much come to the forefront in your face while you're playing this game. I don't really know what the hell happens in the last 25% of Final Fantasy XIII, but everything goes completely downhill. Everything has a flow, everything has a structure, and the story's moving very nicely in its own pace, but when you get to that last 25%, once that open world opens up, everything gets rushed. So fast to the point that it starts giving you whiplash. Like, why are we getting 2 summons at the same time? I have no idea. And it really wouldn't be a big deal if it wasn't for the constant hallways that you're already in before you get to the open world section. The game is already linear. Why am I just pushing forward, bouncing into enemies that are pretty much the same as each other every single time? This is when I start losing my mind. This game had no right to have such a grindy endgame section. I had to spend 10 plus hours or more grinding these characters just so I could proceed into the story. It doesn't help that the next section is a tower that you have to figure out using a lift constantly, just over and over and over again. I was losing my mind at this point. The game was just okay. It was never good to begin with. So why is this section so fucking shit? Those flaws become apparent. The slow animations, you having to wait around to make your next move, when you're doing that over and over and over again, it starts to drive you insane. And why is it that every time I switch classes for the first time, they have to do this goofy animation? Every single time. It drives me nuts. Honestly, if it wasn't for this video, this game would have got dropped once I reached this open world section because it just made me so miserable. Within my moment of frustration of playing this game, I started to sense a bit of sadness when it came to the franchise. It's so insane to me that Square had made successful 10 games, but for some reason, it goes completely downhill after Final Fantasy X. I said earlier that the beauty of this franchise is that you're never really gonna know what you're gonna get. but I do expect a sense of quality every single time, and when that quality isn't met, it doesn't feel like a Final Fantasy anymore. To end this section off with a little bit of praise, the animations are well done, the cutscenes are great, the designs are pretty good, every character has their own walk and run. All those things, the level of detail, it's still there. It's just that everything else still feels a tad shallow. Pushing forward and pressing A just doesn't tickle my pickle for a Final Fantasy game. It just doesn't. And this is where it really goes downhill, because Final Fantasy XIII 2, I couldn't even play because the PC port fucking sucks! Alright, let me take a chill pill. I know it's not that serious, but it does annoy me when you can't play a game because the company behind it didn't want to put enough resources into making the port actually work properly. I managed to play a little bit of Final Fantasy XIII 2, and the little I played, I was actually quite impressed. Because a tiny bit of issues that I had with the original 13 game, they'd fixed for the most part, especially when it came to the animations and how fast the battles were. The cutscenes, yes, do look absolutely stunning, and as I said before, that doesn't make a good Final Fantasy game, but I do enjoy the implementation of the choices here. I don't think it changes anything, but it kept me engaged. But sadly, I could only play an hour of this game. I couldn't really play too much because it just kept crashing, it wouldn't turn on. I tried every tutorial under the sun on YouTube, all these 10-year-old videos that just didn't work for me. When one problem got fixed, another problem arose, like a buzzing sound in my ear every time the game turned on. But not to worry, we can skip to Final Fantasy Lightning Returns, and this one, to me, was actually quite impressive. There isn't really too much to speak on when it comes to this game, because for the most part, it is very much different between part 1 and part 2. I'm trying not to spoil it, especially since they might do these remasters for the 13 trilogy, but the story again makes you realize that Lightning might be one of the worst sisters in video game history. It's unbelievable. I can't even speak on the story without spoiling anything, because this is the third game within the trilogy, and I kind of spoiled myself without playing 13-2, because it was a complete broken mess. I will say that the story isn't really anything to write home about. Overarching story is okay, but all the side quests and all these side missions, complete waste of time. Everything in between, forget about it. They bring in old characters to remind you this is a 13 story, but they themselves seem a bit more dumbed down and a bit more bland than they usually are since the 13 games, so I don't really care for them. But being a bit more positive, I do enjoy the combat change within this game. It's very similar to the first two games, but it's a lot more engaging. You can't just spam buttons, you do have to play a bit more strategically and a bit more tactical, and you gotta make sure you have the right equipment. This is one of those games where you need the best equipment if you wanna get through it. Now, I understand that every Final Fantasy 13 fan knows that the time mechanic doesn't really affect the whole lot. It gives you enough time. But if you're new to the game, you don't exactly know that. And I've never played a game with a time mechanic before. So I was completely worrying every time it was time to do side missions. When I started the game, I pretty much restarted it like 3 times because I felt like I just wasn't doing it fast enough. Which then forced me to go on Google and find our favorite journalist ever, IGN, because they have a really good walkthrough UI for the games, which I don't like doing for JRPGs. I feel like I've lost at that point. So that's that. That is the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. As a whole, I'm a little bit disappointed when it comes to this trilogy because this trilogy is held highly by the Final Fantasy fans. I guess more the newer one because I guess it came on 360 as well from what I remember. I could only really enjoy Final Fantasy XIII 1. I recommend that one for the most part. Once you reach that last 25%, put the game down, don't do it to yourself. Wait till the PC port gets fixed for this if they do a remaster, and that's for the third game. You are just gonna be going through the motions. Be there for the combat, but once you got your fill, you're pretty much gonna put that game down too. I had so much enthusiasm and energy at the beginning of the video, but now at this point, I'm ready just to move on and get on with my life. Because the next 2 games aren't exactly games that I think highly of either. There's nothing really I can add to the conversation when it comes to Final Fantasy 15 and 16, so I'll just talk about them both and just talk about the Final Fantasy franchise as a whole. As of right now, Square Enix is in this weird rut where the games aren't exactly selling well. Even when the games are really good, it seems that the Final Fantasy name just isn't as big as Square would like it to be in this point in time. It seems that the fans have lost trust in Square Enix when it comes to the Final Fantasy IP, or even their other games for matter of fact, unless it's Kingdom Hearts, because I'm sure Kingdom Hearts 4 will sell crazy. For Final Fantasy 15 and 16, it really does show that Square has completely forgotten who is the audience when it comes to Final Fantasy. Now that I have played all of these games were difficult, these games are hard, these games take knowledge, these games take time. If you manage to find my video on this small channel, that means you're a big fan of these games and you're probably one of those people who really put a lot of time into one of these. You are the person that is willing to spend hundreds of hours on one of these games. And for Square to really look at you and say, forget all that, we're gonna go for a simple approach where you either just hold down a single button in 15 or kind of just spam buttons in 16, I think it's completely disrespectful, and I 100% understand why you watching
may no longer be a fan of this franchise anymore. I really don't want to speak on Final Fantasy XV because everything that's been said about the game has been said. Holding down B and the characters do everything for you, that's not engaging, not in the slightest. The game is beautiful. It has so much detail. I like how the characters look and when they move, when they walk and when they run. As for 16, the storytelling and writing is probably the best it's ever been since maybe Final Fantasy X. I think Clive is a strong main character. I think all the characters are written well. I think the story is really engaging and highly entertaining, but it has some of that pacing issues where kind of the main points get split up with all this filler and it's so boring at times. But those highs do remind me that Square still know how to write an amazing story. It's just the gameplay. In search for that mass appeal, they're treating their core audience like dumb babies. Why is there a charm that dodges for you? Why is this in the game? Who decided to put this in the game? These are the guys who played these. And I 100% understand why Final Fantasy fans are no longer buying these or have any interest. I know people like to joke on them and say they're the hardest audience to please. Now that I've played all of them, I get it. I get the frustration. So I don't want to spend too much time just shitting on these two. I'll just say that 15 is one of my least favorite Final Fantasies because a game that plays itself does nothing for me, as I said in the 12 section, and 16 has some really nice highs, but in between those highs, it could be such a slop. It's boring, it's really dry, it just felt like it was filled with filler. It has some beautiful racism though, as I said, beautiful racism.